Good morning, Howard Bracewell here. The kind invitation of Josh to share my testimony just for a few moments. This was done on Sunday but didn't take for some reason or other, so I'm having a rerun. But as I said then, testimonies start in all sorts of different ways. But I just want to start picking up when I was about 5 years of age. When we were living in Manchester, my father was a vicar in the middle of Manchester, or close to the centre of Manchester. And I suppose around about 5, I was beginning to remember things and take note of things. And because it was in the war period, talking about the early 40s, we were on the sort of run of the German bombers, and quite a lot of bombs dropped around us. On one occasion, one dropped literally outside the house, although the house was set back, the vicarage, behind a wall. But when we looked after the raid, there's a great hole in the middle of the road, and tram lines sticking vertically in the air. I can still remember that, I see the picture now. But the thing that really stuck in my memory was not so much that, as the way my parents handled it. My father's vicar was called out by the police to open up the church and take in people who'd been literally bombed out, houses flattened up and as terrace rows. And I just saw the compassion and the love that was oozing out in this situation and throughout the war and indeed beyond. And that really lasted with me all of my life, challenged me as a youngster. Then my father finished that particular pastorate there and I moved to Buxton, which is not far away in Derbyshire, a lovely place. And then after that, after a few years there, we moved to Bolton in Lancashire, where I spent most of my life when I was in England and grew up. I was born in Blackpool. And it was in Bolton, I think, that God began to really get me into a corner and to get me where he wanted me to be. And all the memories of Manchester and my parents' lovely upbringing and faith and trust in the Lord had impounded in my heart. But I was rebelling. By the time I got to my early days, I didn't really honestly want to know. But God had got other plans, as he does. And I've always had fairly strong ideas that I can sort of look after myself, and I know what I want to do and make sure I will do it. But again, God had, as we all know, I'm sure, those of us who are believers, has often got other ideas. And it was about age of 15-ish, it's a long time back, I can't remember specifically, that God really nailed me. And there's an evangelistic rally in Manchester, not too far away from, about 12 miles from where we lived. And a coach was laid on from the church to go to this rally. Alan Redpath was the preacher. And I went somewhat reluctantly because a friend dragged me along onto this coach, and we sat up in the gallery, looking down, seeing miles away where the stage was. And I've been in the Free Trade Hall many times, listening to concerts and Halle Orchestra. But this was different. And at the end of that meeting, I won't go into details. God was really working and picking up all that was laid in my heart from years past. And I'd forgotten maybe, but he hadn't, and the memory was there and it came back. The upshot was I went forward and yielded my life to Christ that night in that place. So immediately the question rose in my mind, what now? I want to control my life, but I'm beginning to understand that it's the other way around. And I remember a lot of passages of scripture which I heard my father mention or others about commitment, and one stuck in my mind. It came into my mind that night of 1 Corinthians. Paul said, "Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you received from God? You are not your own. You are bought with a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your whole being and in your own life." And that resonated, and yet I was still struggling somewhat with it. Life moved on, and some time after that, not very long, we had a curate. My dad had a curates, assistant pastors really, learning the trade, and very often the youth work is given to them. Some of them are lousy at it, but this guy was brilliant, Frank Haslam, and he'd arranged for us to go to a place called Capernary Hall, which I know well, just up the road, as it were, from where we lived, on the edge of the Lake District, and we were going for a week, and we were going to live in tents. But Capernary Hall is a place which is a teaching place, a Bible teaching place, been going for years. Major Ian Thomas started, his son is now in charge of it. And young people come from all over Europe, really. We met people from France and Germany, Holland, who'd come to study the Bible. Some would say just for a few months, others for a year or two, and go back with various levels of understanding of the scriptures. But that week there was a lecturer there called Dr. Ellison, who we'd heard was a Jew, but he was a converted Jew, so we were told. But he was going to lecture or speak for 5 nights during that week on the life of Abraham. So we all trooped in the first night, and 2 or 3 things stick in my mind vividly. One was when he was introduced and he stood up and said, "My name is Dr. Ellison. You've heard I'm a Jew, which is correct. You've also heard that I'm a converted Jew. That is not correct." And we sort of, what have we come to? Have we got the wrong address? But then he just sort of stopped and paused, and then that theatrical pause, as it were, said, "I'm not a converted Jew, I'm a completed Jew, because I've discovered Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, and now I serve him." And then he launched into this period of talks on the life of Abraham. Now, you know the story of Abraham, those of you who are believers, that God called Abraham and Sarah, his wife, saying he promised them that through his heir there will be millions who will become believers. And Sarah and Abraham tried again and again, but were unable to have a child. And when it was beyond hope, humanly speaking, God intervened, sent an angel, said, "Abraham, it's going to happen. You're going to get a son. You're going to call him Isaac." And I won't go into the story, but you probably know it. And God, and this young child was born, and you know the story again, I'm sure. God called Abraham one day. He was in his morning quiet time, maybe, and God spoke as, "Abraham." "Yes, Lord. What would you like today?" "Abraham, take your son," seem to rub it in, "take your son, your only son Isaac, the son whom you love. Take him to Mount Moriah, or to Moriah, to a mountain I will show you. And when you get there, I want you to sacrifice your son on an altar to me." The next verse says he just went and did it, but I can imagine there was a long discussion between Abraham and the Lord and Sarah. But he was a man of faith and trust, and he believed God had given, and God would not necessarily take away without a very good reason. And so Abraham went up with Isaac, and Isaac was discerning at this stage. He must have been in teenagers, maybe, and we don't know his age. But Abraham was carrying a knife, and he was carrying means of lighting a fire, but no sacrifice. And Isaac said, "Your father, where's the sacrifice? You got the knife, you got the fire, where?" And Abraham's response was, you can imagine it choking him, really, to say to him, my son, the Lord will provide." And they got to the top, and he strapped or tied Isaac on the altar, raised a knife, and God stopped. And this is why we've got to be sure that when we hear a voice, it is God's voice, and not the enemy having a go. And God said, "Now I know, Abraham, that you love me with all your heart." And he turned around, there's a ram caught in a thicket, and the rest is history, as they say. And then Ellison said, as he looked around this fairly big crowd of people, young people, and just pointed across, and he said, "Each one of you as a believer will have one occasion, maybe many, when God will call you to give up something very, very real and very precious to you, to let go and to give up everything indeed for the sake of Christ." And here again, this is when the battle with my will took place. I'd given my life to Christ, but I'd not let go of everything to him. And I still wanted to go my way and take God with me. God said, no, I'm going my way, you're coming with me. And eventually the message got through to my sort of slowing brain. And after the meeting, we went back to the tent, and we would normally go in and have a cup of tea or coffee or something. And I said to the blokes I was sharing the tent with, "I'm not coming in at the moment. I want to have a bit of quiet time. Just don't follow me. Just let me go." Climbed over a fence into a field and just walked around that field. It seemed for hours. really just battling with the Lord, and you can't do that and win. It's not a chance. And I knew I had to just say, okay, Lord, whatever it is, let me know and I'll follow you with your help. And sometimes later, quite a few months later, I think my father, who I'd talked to about this, gave me a book about a chap who worked with the American Canadian Indians, Eskimo, in North America, in North Canada, northern Baffin Island. If your geography is a map in front of me, I'm looking at it now, way up at the top on the left, Baffin Island, way up in the north. It's in the 80 degrees latitude. And this man was a wonderful preacher, and he had an accident hunting seals when it had a famine and they were short of food, and seals suddenly appeared, and he fell with his loaded rifle and shot himself. Didn't kill himself, but he was badly injured, a bullet in his brain. His wife, fortunately, was a nurse and could care for him, but there's no medical attention, no hospitals, no means of getting out. Eventually, the Canadian Air Force flew a plane in and did get him out, but he died. And this book was a result, a biography. And right at the end, it was those words of Isaiah, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" I've still got the book, and it's written in now, "Here am I, send me." And then about 1963 or something, I had written again, "He did!" exclamation mark. And amazingly, whether it's God's sense of humour, I don't know, but I finished up in the very place where this guy, Jack Turner, lived and worked and died. And there were people there who still remembered him. And it was quite amazing that I was back in that place where the call to the ministry first came about. But before all that could happen, I had to get rid of my national service, or do my national service, because I enjoyed it, and volunteered. I gave up an apprenticeship and volunteered for the RAF. It had to be the RAF. I was always playing mad. And eventually I had my interview and got in, and was assigned to go to a place called Cardington for kitting out and everything else they do, fill you with jams and whatnot. And the people in our church were praying, I know, regularly that when I got there, there'd be billet full of guys from all over the country, that I would find at least one other Christian who could stand by me and with me, and as I knew I had to make a stand right at the beginning, else it would never happen. And so we got there, and with big blood, I think there were 40 of us in all, and we all nod a noise and clatter and talk and getting to know each other, and the tannoy was blaring. It eventually came to bedtime, and one by one people got into bed, and I waited and waited and waited and waited until I was the last on my feet, and not another had shown any signs that they were likely to pray. So I took a big breath and a deep prayer and said, "Okay, Lord, here we go," and dropped to my knees and thought they won't notice. But of course, it was like a conductor stopping an orchestra with a switch, and the noise stopped, and the comments came. But I had got through that and got into bed. And my prayer was, as I lay in bed, and there's still a buzz going on around the billet, was not, "Why have you not sent another Christian, Lord?" but "How are you going to answer this one? You've not answered it tonight. How will you answer it?" And I didn't know that at that stage. Well, when we got all kitted out, we went to our square bashing stations. Mine was up at West Kirby, again, not far from where I lived. I was living in Bolton still. And West Kirby is on the coast and northwest a little bit. Lovely place. And again, the people there in the billet knew I was a Christian, and life was just going on. I was enjoying my time there. Now, if you've been in the military or have any connections with it, you know if you join as a raw recruit, as I did, you put in a billet with a bunch of other bloke, and in the billet there'll be a corporal who was in charge of that group of men, and very often their only means of speaking was shouting. And they're generally big, boisterous guys. And we had one who was seemed quite a nice guy, I'd say, but he was a big bloke called Bullock, which was perhaps appropriate. But, we weren't having any trouble with him. He kept us in place, but that was it. And then one day, one of my fellow recruits came and said, "Hey, the corporal wants to see you." I thought, oh dear, is this guy a raving communist or what? And or atheist or both, and Anyway, I went to his room, which is just at the end of the billet, and knocked gently on the door, and a great bellow went, and the door rattled, and I thought that said, "Come in," and in I went. And I found him at his desk. He was sitting in front of his desk, not behind it, on a chair, of course, and a big fellow, and I was sort of looking up to him, and he was sitting. And he said, "You're Bracewell?" I said, "Yes, Corporal." And he said, I heard a few things about you." I thought, "Oh dear." He said, "Are you a Christian? I understand." I said, "Well, at this point, I thought, well, I'm in for a pound, in for a penny. Here goes. Yes, I am, Corporal." He said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "And I also hear that you actually say your prayers at night." My first reaction was, "I pray for you too, mate," but I didn't. I thought that was a better option, not to say anything at that point. And so we talked a little bit about that. And then he stood up and stuck his hand out. He says, "Praise God," he says, "I'm a Christian too. And I'm going into the ministry in Methodist Church." And after that, it was great. And I went back into the booth, and all the blokes hanging around said, "Oh, are you in trouble?" I said, "No, but you may be if you don't behave, because he's a Christian." And it's like turning a switch off again. The noise stopped. But I got on well with them. There's no problems there at all. But then, before I could then get on to my training for the ministry, I had to go for 2 years, to over 18 months by now, to a station where I was trained in a trade, which was in signals. And it was down in where I live now, in Wiltshire, about 10-15 minutes from where we actually live. And I've been a few times taking our children to see the billet I lived in, which is still there. And I had a marvellous time. I really enjoyed it. It was an exciting time in many ways, because it was during the Suez crisis, and I was on, we did a watch system, and normally on nights it was dead quiet, but during this period it was absolutely non-stop. And I played a lot of football, which got me out of a lot of things for the station team. But it was a good 2 years. And I remember when I was coming out being demobbed, I went to see as you all do, to see the commanding officer. And he said, "Have you enjoyed your time?" I said, "Well, I have, yes. I've played a lot of football, got me out of things, but on the whole, it's been good." He said, "What are you going to do when you leave here?" I said, "Well, I'm planning to go to college to study for the ministry and to go out as a missionary to the Arctic." And I've never forgotten his reply. He said, "I've had about a couple of blokes through this week going out. You're the first who knows what he's going to do when he gets out." And we had a good chat, actually, about the things of life and of God. Anyway, I came out, and skipping out all bits in between, started studying. Started up at Durham and came down to Bristol here in Tyndale Hall, which was a wonderful college with a tremendous faculty. Jim Packran, Alec Mateer, and all those are our lecturers. Staffy Wright, the principal. And after those 3 years at Tyndale, I was ordained in 1963, in June or July, I think. By which time I was married. I'd got special permission to get married because we were going out soon, straight after ordination. So we'd only been married probably about 18 months. And we set out in July, after my ordination, for Canada with my wife Mavis and our young daughter of 6 months on the Empress of Britain. All very interesting, sailing across the Atlantic to Canada, to Montreal and Toronto, then across by train to Lake Winnipeg, and then from Winnipeg up to Hudson Bay, and then on to Hudson Bay to an icebreaker which took us all up the sides of Baffin Island. Fascinating journey. It took us about a month in all to get there, and then landed at Pond Inlet. And as we, it was fairly early morning. It was a lovely day. It was summer. It was July, or maybe it's August now, and the sun was shining. The snow was on the hills, and all the people out on the beach to meet this new missionary, amongst all the other things that came in. Because all our food for the following year came on that boat, and it was like that till the end. It came in once a year. That was our shopping list. So in lockdown, don't panic too much. It's possible. And we had a great time there, and I didn't speak a word of Eskimo, of course, but I had learned to read the language, the syllabic language, which was a big help. And I think the next day, someone came in with a policeman who was the interpreter at that stage, say he wanted to get married tomorrow. That's how they live up there. So somehow I ploughed through the wedding service in Eskimo. How much they understood, I don't know. The conditions there were difficult. No electricity. There was no, obviously, light apart from gas lamps. There was no running water. There was no central heating. There was no flue. We had a sort of heater, which was heated by coal. We could mine our own coal, which geologically is interesting, in open seams. And there's no medical facilities at all whatsoever, apart from the policeman who was the Mountie. He didn't come on a horse, came in a plane. He was well trained, but that was all we had. And then we had a few crises in the times that we were there with health. But the lessons I'd learned in the RAF and before it came to bear, and particularly that time with Dr. Ellison, that you'll face more than one occasion when God will ask you to let go of things and let him guide you through it. And we learned the truth of that. And that prayer that my parishioners or my dad's parishioners had prayed for a colleague was answered very forcibly when that corporal I met was a Christian as well. But as we went out there and started this ministry, again, on the many occasions that there were sort of crises in some ways, my mind went to Paul's Philippians. My God will supply every need of yours according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. To our God be glory, to our God and Father be glory forever and ever. And that's where we still stand at 85 years of age, still seeking to serve him. This is only part of the story. What comes next is another story. But thank you for tuning in, and may God bless you, and learn to trust this God who will not let you go. God bless you.